Well, for more, we can speak to our correspondent in Brussels, Dave Keating. Dave, tell us a bit more about what happened on Thursday.
Well, Angela Merkel, always the crafter of compromise and true to form, this at probably her last summit. She was also trying to seek compromise on this. The issue is, there are kind of two issues. One is that the EU and other EU countries are concerned about the erosion of the rule of law in Poland, the dismantling of media pluralism, the political interference with the judiciary. And then separately, earlier this month, a Polish court ruled that the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, the EU Supreme Court, doesn't have final say over all areas of EU law, that technically a Polish court could overrule the EU Supreme Court. That has really plunged the EU into a kind of constitutional crisis. And there are many other prime ministers in the EU who are saying that Poland should have its EU funds frozen until this issue is resolved, until essentially Poland acknowledges the primacy of EU law and the ability of the EU Supreme Court to make final decisions on being the arbiter of EU law. So last night, they had a discussion on this. Council President Charles Michel was really desperate to keep this off the agenda. In the end, it was added as a discussion point, not a formal point on the agenda, and he was able to keep that discussion to less than 2 hours. There wasn't a repeat of the last Council summit in June, where the anti-LGBT law in Hungary really hijacked the whole summit. We're told that the discussion was much calmer than that discussion in June, but that everyone had a chance to say their piece. And essentially what the other EU prime ministers said to the Commission is, we want you to continue your analysis of this ruling, and if it's found that this is against Poland's accession treaty, then you should take action by using various means at your disposal. One of them is withholding EU funding through this rule of law conditionality mechanism. But it does seem like there's consensus that before that can happen, the European Court of Justice actually has to rule on the legality of that mechanism. The irony here being that maybe Poland doesn't care what the ECJ says one way or another. So we really didn't move the needle at all. Basically, the consensus was that Poland's mind wasn't changed, the other leaders' minds weren't changed, and they basically agreed to park this issue while the Commission does an analysis of that court ruling.
And Dave, this is a second and final day, talks focusing on migration. What in particular will they discuss?
So in particular, they're talking about the crisis at the Belarus border. So the EU is accusing Belarus of using migrants as weapons, purposefully sending them over the EU border as retaliation for the sanctions that the EU adopted against Belarus for what it says was a fraudulent presidential election last year. So the controversial proposal from 10 EU countries is that the EU should start funding a border wall, at that border between Belarus and Lithuania and Poland. That is obviously controversial. It's sounding very Trumpian, and so a lot of prime ministers have a big problem with this. However, we saw Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, the new Chancellor of Austria, give a impassioned defense of the border wall. It was interesting because, of course, his predecessor, Sebastian Kurz, was known as being very hard right on this issue. It looks like the Austrian government is going to continue that line. And there were other non-border states that seem to be backing this idea. But it is very controversial. I haven't heard any EU leaders speak out strongly against this idea of a border fence or a border wall, specifically at that border with Belarus. So we'll see as the summit ends today and the leaders come out of their meetings what they'll say about this idea, because for sure every prime minister and president is going to be asked about this idea of a border wall at the EU's eastern border.
All right, Dave, thank you very much. Dave Keating reporting from Brussels.